Hello and thank you so much for tuning in. So in today's video, I think I have a pretty exciting topic in store, and that is what the Tarte Icy Betch Palette might look like if it were real. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, Tarte pulled a pretty unfortunate April Fool's Day prank wherein they posted an image of a palette to their social media titled the Icy Betch Palette that was filled with these beautiful blues and greens, and people were really excited about it. Now, it being April Fool's Day and Tarte not really being known for doing interesting, colorful eyeshadows anyways, it turned out to be an April Fool's Day joke to everyone's disappointment. But I have a really good news for you, and that's that you don't need Tarte, okay? You don't need Tarte or any other cosmetics brand for that matter to create your dream blue, green, or whatever other creative color eyeshadow palette you want. And that's because you can create your own, which is precisely what I've done for this video. The great thing about all the shades that I'm going to be mentioning is I think they're all relatively affordable. None of the eyeshadows that you're going to be seeing in this palette today are going to run you more than $5 a pop. And there are 3 total brands that I'm going to be mentioning today, and those are Coastal Scents, Devinah Cosmetics, and Looxi Beauty. Now, Devinah Cosmetics and Looxi Beauty both sell their eyeshadows for $5 a piece, and Coastal Scents eyeshadows can be purchased for $1.95. Now, Devinah Cosmetics, I should actually point out, has a set that you can buy that mimics the tones in the Icy Betch palette. I think they're calling it their Harmony Collection Blue Betch set. It retails for $64, which sounds like a lot, but you're getting a lot. So it comes with 12 of their eyeshadows. It comes with 2 highlighters. One is like an iridescent blue shade, one is like an iridescent green, so it goes perfectly with the theme of the palette. And then you actually get like an empty palette that they're all housed in, so you don't actually have to go out and buy a separate palette. So it comes with all of that. So I thought that that was a pretty cool idea on their part, and some of the shades that you will see here are actually shades that are from that collection. I do have some shades from them that I didn't actually choose to include in here, but that just goes to show Devinah Cosmetics, they have a large selection of eyeshadows from, you know, every color of the rainbow that you could possibly imagine, and they did choose all of those shades from their existing collection. They didn't just make these to mimic the shades, they just chose shades that they had already existing, you know, laying around in the warehouse. So I thought that that was pretty cool. It is showing us currently out of stock for me as of the time of me filming this video, but you can sign up for an email notification to be notified when it comes back in stock. Anyways, back to the eyeshadows here. Like I said, Devinah Cosmetics and Looxi Beauty will oftentimes run sales, so you may not even end up paying the full retail value of their eyeshadows. Devinah Cosmetics, over the past few months, their sales have been 35% off, which is really good in my opinion. And then Looxi Beauty will often do 20% off, you know, around like holidays and stuff like that. And then Coastal Scents eyeshadows, which they call their hot pots, a few times out of the year they will do their hot pot sale, in which they discount their hot pots to 99 cents from $1.95. And speaking of Coastal Scents, the eyeshadow palette that you're seeing here where these eyeshadows are housed is a Coastal Scents palette as well. It's just a 12 pan palette that will fit any standard like 26mm eyeshadow, and this retails for $5.95. And they also have a mirrored version as well, which is really nice and sturdy, that also retails for $5.95. So these are excellent options for storing your single eyeshadows if you don't want to pay, you know, $20 for a Z palette or whatever. So the total value of the eyeshadows that I've chosen for this particular palette, if you were paying full price for these again, would be $51. And you know, you throw in the palette, the eyeshadow palette here, that adds another $6 or so. And I think that's a pretty good price because the Tarte 12 pan palettes now retail for $46. So you're only paying a few dollars more and you can pick out, you know, whatever shades you want. Now, you may still be saying, I don't want to, you know, go out and purchase, you know, all these different eyeshadows from all these different places and pay all these different, you know, shipping and handling fees and taxes. Even though I don't even think I pay taxes, at least not in my state, for any of these brands. But either way, you may still be saying, hey, I don't want to, I still, that's a lot of work. I don't want to do that. I would rather have the convenience of a pre-made palette. And that's kind of why people like eyeshadow palettes. It's conveniently, everything is there for you, you know. So I do have a pre-made palette option, and it's a drugstore pre-made palette that is actually really good. So if you want to see what that option is, then make sure to stay tuned till the end of the video. For now, I'm going to go ahead and get into the actual shades that are here, and I will be sharing swatches, and all of the details for these shades will be linked in the description box down below. Now, before I get into the actual palette, there are a few things I wanted to address first. You might be looking at my palette and saying, that looks quite a bit different from the one Tarte posted to their social media, and it is, and it's kind of on purpose. So I've opted for some deeper tones than what you see in the Tarte Icy Betch image because I felt like those are tones that would suit my skin tone. And I noticed that in the mock-up palette that Tarte did, they used 3 what I like to call light bright shades. Basically any matte shade that's like a white or some variant of an off-white. They're going to be light bright shades. They're not going to work that well on my skin tone, or they're all going to look the same. And I feel like that is the case for most skin tones. These really light shades are going to look the same on a lot of different skin tones. So I don't know why companies continue, and it's not just Tarte. A lot of companies, like in actual palettes, will put 3 or 4 different like variations of white or eggshell or linen with maybe some sort of a slight, you know, difference in undertone to them. So I personally don't really care for that. Now, obviously, if you want those types of shades, you can seek those out. Like I said, the Devinah Cosmetics bundle is a great place to start. All those shades are shades that they sell individually on their website. But for my palette, I've chosen to go with shades that I know will work well for my skin tone. Also, I decided to go for a couple of greens that were a little bit different than what Tarte did. Now, I actually like the greens that Tarte used, which were these really nice, almost Kelly greens. Like one was a metallic and one was a matte. But I feel like I kind of wanted to make this palette based on what I thought people would like consumers would like, even though this isn't going to consumers. And I feel like in general, people oftentimes will complain about palettes not being like cohesive, which honestly to me, I personally like when a palette challenges me. I don't mind when palettes have, you know, crazy colors in weird orders, because sometimes it makes me consider color combinations that I hadn't thought of. But I don't think that that's generally how a lot of people look at eyeshadow palettes. So instead of going for those bright Kelly greens, which were really nice shades, I decided to choose greens that had a little bit more of a blue tone to them, because I thought that those would tie in overall with the palette a little bit better. I feel like people would look at these and think that these make more sense in this palette overall. I also decided to go with an order that I thought people would like as well, because Tarte's Icy Betch palette had the shades kind of like scattered all over the place, which is the case for most eyeshadow palettes. So I decided to keep somewhat of an order going on here. Like, you know, this whole row right here is light to dark mattes. These shades are some of our more green tone shades, you know, so I tried to keep somewhat of an order going on, and that's why my palette looks quite a bit different from the Tarte palette. But the general message of this video anyways is that if there is a particular color scheme in a palette that you want, that you feel is not on the market, you can create it yourself. So this first shade that I have here is Hypnotic by Looxi Beauty, and I noticed that this shade actually isn't on the website as of me filming this video. But the great thing about Looxi is I've noticed they're a brand that is constantly rotating items in and out of their collection, and the owner and brand is very responsive to emails. I've inquired myself about if a particular shade was coming back in stock, and they've gotten back to me and said, yes, it is. Here's the date it's coming back. So if you see a shade in this video that is not available when you watch this video and you're interested in it, I would definitely suggest contacting the company. The second shade I have here is Candy by Devinah Cosmetics, and I feel like these two shades are actually quite similar to one another in that I would describe them both as being periwinkles, just that Hypnotic is more of a subdued, muted periwinkle, whereas Candy is a very bright, vivid periwinkle. I will note, however, that with both of these shades, I noticed they did get a little bit deeper as I blended them out. But if you want them to appear truer to color as they are in the pan, then you can just pack them on and you really do regain the same colors that you are seeing in the pan. I will also note that Candy by Devinah Cosmetics and a lot of their matte shades tend to be more on the powdery, like soft powdery side of things, but they do blend really nicely and they are quite pigmented. The next shade I have here is called Naval, and it is also by Devinah Cosmetics, and it's just a really nice, I would describe it almost as like a muted blue. The next shade I have here is Navy Berry, and this is by Coastal Scents, and this shade basically acts as my stand-in for a black. I feel like if you are pining after colors like these in an eyeshadow palette, you probably already have countless blacks and even dark browns in your collection, so why throw in another one, you know? But I did want to have a shade, you know, for the people who are like, hey, what about a matte shade to help deepen up a look, to help smoke out a look? So that's kind of why I decided to include this. I feel like this honestly is the most non-essential shade of the bunch, because even though I do like it and I think it has a good formula, it does basically serve the same function as a black. It's quite dark, so it's really going to look more like a black. I do feel like it does pair nicely with the blues in this palette because I think the blue in it does stand out most when it's paired with the other blues in this palette. But again, I feel like you could probably get a very similar effect just using a black shade you already had in your collection. This next shade I have here is called Cupid by Devinah Cosmetics, and this is basically just an icy blue shade. I put this here as sort of a highlight color, so you could use this in the inner corner or in the center of the lid if you wanted to really punch up a look. On my skin tone, when I swatch this by itself, it looks quite silver. It's really hard to see the blue tones in here, but I noticed that paired with the other blue shades in this palette, you definitely do pick up on the blue tones that are in this shade. The next shade I have here is called Giggity by Looxi Beauty, and this shade is basically just a muted teal, I would say. It's really pigmented and blends very nicely. The next shade I have here is called Queen of Mean, and this is by Looxi Beauty. This is a really interesting shade. I would describe it as a duo tone type of shade, but it's really interesting because I think the tones that I'm seeing in the shade are sort of a metallic lighter green and then a sort of teal green color. So it's quite an interesting flash, but it's a beautiful shade, and I think it will go really well with the other shades in this palette. The next shade I have here is Pinehurst, and this is by Coastal Scents, and this is a really nice sort of matte foresty green shade. Now this shade does take a little bit of building up, but not much, and the end result is really nice. I even picked this over the shade Bottle Green by MAC, which is in my collection as well. It's another dark foresty green, but this honestly has a better formula in my opinion. The next shade here is one of my favorite shades probably in my entire eyeshadow collection, and this is Noir by Looxi Beauty. I would describe this as a dark periwinkle. This color definitely shows up as blue on my skin tone, and I really don't have anything quite like it because I don't have, first of all, periwinkle in and of itself I think is a shade that you don't really see very often on the market, and if you do, I feel like you do tend to see more so matte tones, but this is a metallic periwinkle shade, so I think that makes it pretty unique. Next up I have the shade Paladin by Devinah Cosmetics, and this is a interesting duochrome shade as well. It is basically like a lighter, brighter blue that shifts to sort of a darker, almost like indigo blue. It's really beautiful. The actual shade itself is more so of a satin finish, which is not my favorite type of finish, but I think because of the sort of subtle duochrome shift that it has to it, it does make this shade look a lot more interesting on the eyes. So the next shade I have here is called Indigo by Coastal Scents, and the name is pretty self-explanatory. It is a matte indigo shade, and this is probably one of my favorite shades by Coastal Scents. It's a really nice, punchy, poppy, vibrant, yet really rich and deep color. So I just thought that this could be a really nice sort of deeper pop of color for the palette. And then lastly here I have the shade Midnight by Looxi Beauty, which is this really beautiful metallic blue. I always think of blueberries every time I look at the shade because it's quite dark like a blueberry, but it's still very noticeably blue, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And it is a little bit more subdued as well, so again I think it really does go with some of the other muted tones in the palette as well. So I hope that you found those swatches helpful in opening your eyes to some of the really great blue single eyeshadow options that there are out there. Even though the palette marking is lacking in that department, there certainly aren't a shortage of those types of shades in eyeshadow singles. Now, I didn't just throw these eyeshadows into a palette for the sake of the video. I also did do looks with these shades in this palette, which was actually quite fun. You know, it's kind of like having a new eyeshadow palette in your collection without actually having new eyeshadow in your collection. But I'll go ahead and show you the 3 looks that I did, and then remember at the very end of the video I do have a pre-made palette option as well. So for this look with my Make Believe blue-green eyeshadow palette, I first went in with a primer, and I used the NARS Smudge Proof eyeshadow base. For the first color, I went in with Candy by Devinah Cosmetics, and I used that in the inner portion of my crease. I then went in with Hypnotic by Looxi Beauty, and I used this in the middle to outer portion of my crease as my transition color. I then took Queen of Mean by Looxi Beauty, and I just patted this color onto the center of the lid. I then went in with Naval by Devinah Cosmetics, and I used this as my outer corner color. I then went in with Pinehurst, which is by Coastal Scents, and I used this along the lower lash line. And then I went in with Noir by Looxi Beauty as my inner corner highlight. So for this next look, I wanted to use shades that I hadn't already used in the palette. So first I took Indigo by Coastal Scents, and I patted this onto the outer lid I will say this is one of those colors that will lose its vibrancy the more that you blend it, so the best method of using the shade would be to pack it on either with your finger or with a stiffer brush, and then blend out as needed and reapply as needed. I then went in with this shade, which is Paladin by Devinah Cosmetics, and I used this on my lid. I then took Hypnotic by Looxi Beauty and I blended this into the crease right above where I placed Paladin. I then used Navy Baby by Coastal Scents and put this on my outer V and also continued it along the lower lash line. And I used Indigo on the inner portion of the lower lash line. I then finished off the look with using Noir by Looxi Beauty in the inner corner. This was definitely one of the messier looks with this palette. I definitely did get a little bit of fallout from the darker shade Navy Baby here, and also Indigo I did have to build up a few times while I was blending. Some of the color did go away, so I just patted it back on. Not that big of a deal. I am used to that happening with some more bright colors, and that is the case for this shade as well. So this is my next look using the Tarte dupe palette, and this look was really simple to create and only used 4 shades out of the palette. So first I took Giggity by Looxi Beauty and I placed this directly onto my outer corner, and I started to blend this slowly onto the outer lid and also up into the crease. I then took Midnight by Looxi Beauty and I patted this onto the lid and slightly upwards towards the crease to connect with the Giggity. I then continued Giggity along the lower lash line, and I also used a little bit of Candy by Devinah Cosmetics on the inner third of the lower lash line and blended it with Giggity. And lastly, I took Cupid by Devinah Cosmetics and I just popped this into the inner corner and also blended it slightly onto the inner portion of the lid with Midnight. Overall, I really like this look, and big ups to Giggity by Looxi Beauty. I think this is the true champion of this look. I was able to get the punch of color that I really wanted from this shade on my outer V, but because it blended so nicely onto my lid and also into the crease, I didn't feel the need to use any other matte colors as transitions for this look. It worked so nicely that I didn't even have to use any concealer to kind of clean up the edges, which usually I have to do with these types of shades. Now, if you've made it here, you've pretty much stuck around till the very end of the video, or you fast forwarded here because you were like, I'm not about that single eyeshadow life, which I completely understand. But I do have a pre-made palette alternative for you all, and that is the NYX In Your Elements water palette. Now, I didn't even realize that these palettes were still available. In fact, this one as well as 2 other ones from this line are more recent additions to my own eyeshadow palette collection, but I have to say I've been really impressed with the quality of them, and this one in particular. I do find that normally blue eyeshadows at the drugstore can be very dodgy, but the quality that I'm getting in this palette is quite good. Now, this palette full retail value is actually $30, which is probably why you haven't heard too many people talk about it. Aside from the initial outrage and shock that people had when NYX announced how much this palette was going to cost. In fact, I want to say shortly after releasing it, the price dropped to $15, and I don't think you can get this at Ulta anymore. At least I haven't seen it at Ulta or on Ulta's website, but it is still around and kicking on the NYX website. Now, I picked this palette up for $15, but for some reason NYX is selling these for $24 right now. I'm not exactly sure why, because I'm pretty sure they've been $15 for quite a long time now. But the great thing about NYX is they often have promo codes floating around. In fact, I found one just before I sat down to film for 25% off. So definitely make sure you do your due diligence in searching for coupon codes before you check out, because you can save money that way. So you'll still probably be able to save a few dollars off of these, or you know, you could just wait until these go on sale for $15. Again, presumably, hopefully they will. These are supposed to be limited edition, but they have been around for quite some time, and I've noticed that NYX has been restocking these even though certain options for these palettes have gone out of stock. This palette is what you are seeing on my eyes today, so I'll just go ahead, like for the other looks in this video, quickly walk through the shades that I've used. Unfortunately, these don't have names. They're kind of just numbered like 1 through 12, but I'll just, you know, point to the shades that I'm wearing on my eyes. So I first started off with this gorgeous True Blue, and I packed this sort of into the outer corner and lightly started to blend it in towards the crease. Then I went in with this dark satin blue shade and I packed this on to the lid. I then took this satin light blue shade and I actually used this in the inner portion of my crease, which I was not too sure about because I generally don't tend to put anything other than mattes in my crease, but it ended up looking really nice. I know that putting anything other than a matte in your crease is a makeup faux pas, but it really shouldn't be. On my lower lash line, I used this muted matte teal shade, which resembles Giggity by Looxi Beauty. I decided I wanted a little bit of a highlight in the inner corner, so I ended up taking NYX glitter glue, actually, speaking of NYX products, and I patted a little bit of that on the center of my lid, just a tiny bit, and I went in with this metallic light blue shade. This one is a little bit chunkier than the rest, but it's definitely workable. And had I not already sort of applied a dry powder to the rest of my lids, I wouldn't have needed to have gone in with glitter glue because I could have just taken this shade and topped it on whatever sort of tacky base I was using. But since I already had powder shadow there, I went ahead and used the glitter glue. So I took this shade and just patted it right into the center of the lid on top of the NYX glitter glue. Then for my inner corner, I went in with this shade, which is a really pretty sort of white base iridescent blue. It resembles Road Stripe by Urban Decay if you've ever come across that shade. So overall, like I said, I'm really impressed with the quality of this palette. I think that all of the shades in here are quite nice. Like I said, there are a few that are a little bit trickier to work with, like this metallic shade that's a little bit chunkier, but it's not impossible. And by the way, in terms of fallout, I would say this had like an average amount of fallout. I didn't notice anything outrageous, so that's another great thing about this palette, because with these blues you would expect, and it being maybe a little bit cheaper, you might expect there to be crazy fallout everywhere, but that was not the case. But overall, really nice color selection. Most of the shades in here I feel like tended to be more of the subtle metallic shades. I tend to prefer sort of more punchy metallics, so that would be like the one thing I would change about the palette if I could. But these are still really nice tones, and I think too, if you are somebody who is maybe just wanting to kind of dip your toe into bluish green eyeshadows, then I think the finish of these actually makes a lot of sense. And you can obviously always punch them up a bit more by using Fix Plus or some other sort of foiling agent. But that pretty much wraps up this video. Please feel free to give it a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe to my channel for like content. Also, let me know if you'd be interested in seeing more content like this, sort of create your own palettes, or even let's dupe it for palettes that actually do exist, because I do have a lot of single eyeshadows and I actually really like this idea of sort of taking them and putting them into their own sort of color schemes. But anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!